This is Lesson 25.3, The Home Front. In what ways did the war transform life on the home front? College Board Topic 8.2, World War I. Explain the causes and effects of World War I. World War I, caused by a complex interaction of long and short-term factors, resulted in immense losses and disruptions for both victors and vanquished. Explain how the development of World War I changed political and diplomatic interactions between and among nations. The effects of military stalemate, national mobilization, and total war led to protest and insurrection in the belligerent nations and eventually to revolutions that changed the international balance of power. Place, Europe, time frame 1914 to 1919. Key concepts of the home front: the War Materials Board, the Espionage and Sedition Acts, Ministry of Munitions, Mutiny, and the War Labor Board. Key people of the home front: Walter Rathenau, George Clemenceau, Karl Liebknecht, General Paul von Hindenburg, and Erich Ludendorff. Intro. There were three big changes for men and women on the home front. These were all the result of total war. State bureaucracies grew, people's lives were transformed, and there were mass anti-war protests. Mobilizing for total war. A couple of things became very apparent to everyone within months. The war was at an indefinite stalemate, casualties would be heavy, sustaining the war effort would require some new things. Everyone's all-out effort, massive government intervention in the economy and in society. Intrusion into the daily lives of the people. Rationing, care for widows, care for veterans, censorship, production quotas, wage and price controls, and the result? A much more effective, destructive, and deadly war machine. Germany took total war farther than anyone else. They had the War Raw Materials Board. It was pioneered by Jewish industrialist Walter Rathenau. The board took nationwide inventory of every raw material imaginable, and it rationed and distributed these raw materials and developed substitute resources. The Auxiliary Service Law. Under this law, males 17 to 60 could only work jobs critical to the war effort. Many women had to replace their positions, and many of these lived on little more than 1,000 calories per day. After 1917, Germany was a military dictatorship. It was led by General Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff. Together, they forced the German chancellor out of office. And this dictatorship was highly supported by the conservative Fatherland Party. Other countries did much the same things as Germany did. The British had the Ministry of Munitions. The U.S. set up the War Labor Board and the War Industries Board. The U.S. also passed the Espionage and Sedition Act. The overall result of these agencies was regulation of industry, labor, and agriculture, and the weakening of civil liberties. The social impact of total war. There was an intense need for workers during this time, and this gave labor unions more prestige. Governments were forced to work with unions on all kinds of issues. Unions and labor leaders became part of policy councils. Socialist leaders joined war governments. Women's activities expanded. Women worked more, quote, men's jobs, and they often had to give these jobs back to men after the war was over. Women got the right to vote soon after the war. But women's movements lost momentum once the war was truly over in the 20s and 30s. There was much more social equality in total war. Bullets didn't care whether they killed an aristocrat or an unskilled laborer. And the bottom one-third of society lived better than ever before. And like we said, women got the right to vote soon after the war. Highly skilled workers and foremen also escaped death because of their value to the war effort. Many of these were too needed at their jobs to be made into soldiers. Growing political tensions. In the first part of the war, people generally supported their governments. Lots of intense propaganda helped control public opinion. Censorship of the press made it possible to slant stories. But by 1916, people were beginning to crack under the strain, shortages, and other burdens brought on by total war. In Germany, socialist leader Karl Liebknecht attacked the war effort in front of thousands of people. He was arrested and imprisoned, but he galvanized the political far left of all of Europe. In Ireland, Irish Republican nationalists used the war as a chance to step up their fight for independence. In April of 1916, they launched the Great Easter Rising. Irish Republican militias took over parts of Dublin, and they proclaimed an Irish Republic. British troops crushed it. This paved the way for the nationalist Sinn Fein party, and after the war in the 1920s, there was a full-scale civil war in Ireland. By 1917, you had almost total breakdown. In France, entire military units were refusing to fight, and many were shot for mutiny. And the new general-in-chief, Henri-Philippe Pétain, had to promise no more wasteful grand offensives, just to restore order. In Italy lost a major battle at Caporetto in November 1917. They had 10,000 dead, 30,000 injured, and 265,000 captured. The Italian army collapsed in despair. In Germany, the entire country suffered from the British naval blockade. 750,000 Germans starved to death. And in April 1917, 200,000 workers struck in Berlin for a week. Austria-Hungary lost its chief minister in October 1917 and its emperor, Franz Joseph, the next month. Czech and Balkan leaders were demanding independence, and the empire broke up in revolt and exhaustion by the winter of 1917. In Russia, Russian soldiers deserted in droves. Russia was resorting to using women and children to fight. And all of this paved the way for the Russian Revolution of 1917. All of these countries were on their way to cracking under the strain of total war. But Russia just happened to be the first to crack.